love and I took it down. Climbed a mountain and I turned around, and I saw my reflection in the snow-covered hills till the landslide brought it down. Mirror in the sky, what is love?
Hi gang, welcome to another video. Welcome to the new subscribers. We've got a couple now, so good of you to join in on the journey. This is part 3 of the trip, and you might remember that in the last episode we had found ourselves a rental accommodation, a nice 2-story house organised by the bakery. We were waiting on our furniture to arrive from Australia to settle in, and we were wide-eyed new occupants of this far-flung place called Brakpan. I think I affectionately learnt in the early days to call it the brown puckered hole of the Transvaal. Those first few weeks as we were trying to settle in, and we remember we'd started school, Aiden and myself. Of course we had no car, and it's like Australia, you know, in these towns, if you don't have a car then you're a bit restricted as to what you can see and where you can go. So vivid memories of the 4 of us, Mum, Dad and Aiden and myself, tagging behind, lagging behind, walking around seeing these dusty brown streets of Brakpan. It's quite a dry place. It's high on the veld, so it can get cold in the mornings. Weather conditions are, you know, they're in the southern hemisphere, so they're similar to Australia. You know, their winters are the same as our winters, but yes, it can get quite crisp and cold in winter, and hot and dry and dusty in summer. So one of the early things we discovered when we were walking around was asking the locals for directions, and they would point us towards the robot. Go down to the robot and turn right there. Of course, we didn't know what a robot was. Can you guess? Yeah, a robot was a traffic light. So we'd walk down and we'd turn right whilst we were looking for this mysterious robot. What we discovered was that Brakpan had a dam, and Brakpan still has a dam, but there was quite a bit of activity down there. There was camping grounds and a bit of an amateur slide, I think, with a small, you know, there were pony rides, but there was a little zoo, and there was it was very, in these days, when you look at zoos from that time, they were very cruel. They were concrete and wire and bars, but in one of these enclosures was a little monkey, a little black, almost like a spider monkey, and this little monkey would come up to the bars and sit with his back to you, and Aiden and I soon discovered that if you reached in and started to give him a little scratch and a little, what he wanted was for you to look for fleas on him, or mites, whatever his family of monkeys would have done, how they groomed themselves. And if you turned around and put your head up against the bars, he would likewise start looking for lice or whatever nits that him and his monkey tribe would look for on each other. It was very sad. It was a very sad, lonely existence for that little monkey. Occasionally we could borrow a car. Dad could borrow a car from the standard bakery. Dad had sort of thrown himself into work. He was working shift work, mornings and afternoons, and sometimes we could borrow a car from the standard bakery. Dad's boss was a fella called Barry Blumenfeld, a tall, lanky Jewish man, very kind, very welcoming. And sometimes we would borrow either one of the bread trucks, or we could borrow Barry's wife had a little sort of a little Oxford car, or Wolseley, or one of those English cars, an Austin maybe. You'll hear more about that soon. And so we could start looking around. I don't really have any memories, but I think we did go and see some other African villages around there. Now things started to change for Mum, and in a way they started to look up for Mum. All her life she'd been dogged with a think it was a peptic ulcer. It restricted her from doing some of the things she loved, which was being an extrovert. She loved parties, she loved having a drink, and she always had trouble with her stomach with this ulcer, so she had to be careful of the how much she drank and also the foods she could eat. She was quite an adventurous woman for her time, remembering she'd taken me to Japan in 1965. So she was quite adventurous with trying foreign foods and foreign languages and that type of thing. So at some stage in those early days, this ulcer burst, and she was taken to the local hospital, which I think was Dalview, and they fixed up her ulcer. She was finally able to recover and to do some of the things that she'd always wanted to do and missed out on doing, as far as eating and drinking were concerned. She also got involved, and maybe it was because of that stay at Dalview, and I think it was Dalview Hospital she was at, but she made some inquiries about getting some work there. Now, my sister Pauline was a nurse, and my mum was very proud of Pauline and being, taking on the job as a nurse, a trained nurse. And so I think Mum wanted to follow along those lines, and she got a job as a nurse's aide at Dalview. And I know in some of the letters and some of the tapes that Mum sent back, she was very enthusiastic telling my sister about this job that she'd taken on. So things were looking up for Mum in some aspects. On the darker side, and I'm not going to go into all the details about it, but Mum was also struggling. We were terribly homesick. We were probably, we were only 3 or 4 months away from home at this stage, but she was suffering badly from homesickness. We were writing and sending cassettes off furiously. Christmas was sort of a few months away. And now I mentioned in the previous video we stayed in the Brakpan Hotel, and I mentioned the waiters. Now, one of those waiters was a fellow called Jack. Jack shared the attributes of a lot of African people in that he had the most magnificent set of white pearly teeth and a smile that lit up the room, and he was big and he was boisterous, and his laughter and his personality. There was also some of the women that worked in the, dining room that Mum befriended, but it was particularly Jack. And we kept in contact with Jack when we left the Brakpan Hotel. There's a picture of me wearing my Hawthorn jumper standing beside Jack. Now, Mum bought Jack one of these sort of Stetson hats. I remember going down to the clothing store, and I think it raised Dad's concerns or ire a little bit. It was an expensive hat, and in those days for an African man to have a hat and a suit was a sign of prestige. I think it was Mum's, for the same reason she gave away a pair of her own earrings to those African women in the Zulu village. It was Mum's way of trying to dispel the notion that all white people were racists and were embroiled in apartheid. I know Mum also went to the Catholic Church and confronted the priest about what they were doing as an organisation, as a Catholic Church. What were they doing to question apartheid? Now, things went down with Jack and my mum, and I'll leave you to figure out what did happen, but I can say that I witnessed violence in that house, in that rental accommodation, that no child of 10 or 11 should see. But at the same time, because I was there, I was able to diffuse the violence that was happening between my parents. I saw my mum go down into a very dark place. She was probably nearing a mental breakdown, and things were very distressing, I can say that. Now, that's the situation we were in those last few months of 1971, the afternoon rains had come. There's a time in Brakpan when the heat becomes unbearable and the humidity build up, and each afternoon the thunderclouds roll in and you hear the approaching thunder, and you know there'll be the relief of that driving rain on the African soil, that smell of the hot rain hitting the dusty red soil of Africa. I'll never forget that. And Mum and I would lay on her bed and we'd watch those thunderstorms roll in, and we'd listen to the crack, watch for the flash of lightning, and then the relief would come with the rains. And this happened for, I'd have to think, for a week or 10 days. Each afternoon Mum and I were gathered on that bed at the same time and talking, and she was telling me that we'd be going back to Australia, that she'd be saving up a bit of money and Aidan and I would go back to Australia. That's one thing that I didn't join, even though I had never really wanted to go to South Africa. I didn't join the coalition against my dad. I found it particularly unfair that Mum and my brother seemed to be blaming Dad for the tribulations, is that the word? For the challenges we were facing. I didn't think that was fair. I didn't think it was all his fault. We had all agreed to get on that ship, so I did take sides a bit, and I did take Dad's side on that. And yeah, we were homesick, as I said earlier on. Some of our furniture did arrive, and one of those things was something that Aidan got back in Melbourne, and he can still remember where he got that. But it was a full-size skeleton, it was cardboard, but it was over 6 foot, and it had limbs that could move, and you could position it. And I remember we put it up in our upstairs bedroom in Prince George Avenue, and on occasions we had drivers pull over the cars to come and ask about where we'd got this skeleton from. So our furniture had arrived, and in fact my little bicycle that I was riding around Brighton in those last weeks of summer before we left, that arrived. Yeah, those thunderstorms, the ants would come out, the flying ants that had burrowed in and waited all their life cycle for the rains, the summer rains to come, would suddenly come to life, and the garden and the lights and all around the windows would be filled with these flying ants. The Africans would gather them and put them in plastic shopping bags and take them home and roast them in pans with a bit of salt, and they were something like a beer nut or a peanut. Sometimes the Africans would be struck on the roads because they'd be trying to gather these flying ants off the road, and the cars would hit these Africans on their hands and knees scooping up ants. Now back at school, I was struggling. They let me go for the first for the first semester. I was sort of given free rein to not try and take on Afrikaans because of me having just arrived. So they let it slide, and they didn't enforce me learning Afrikaans as a second language. But that didn't last long, and they introduced me to a book called Die Groot Man, which is the giant. It's spelled D-I-E, Die Groot, G-R-O-O-T, and Man, M-A-N. So to my English eyes it said Die Groot Man. Now the teacher gave me this book, which was really designed for 5 or 6 year olds to read to a class of 11-year-olds, and I had to stand in front of the class, and of course my pronunciation was atrocious, and it was just it was a comedy club appearance for the rest of the class, and I never forgot it. It embarrassed me deeply, and it fortified in me this dislike and hatred for the language of Afrikaans, and I vowed I would never learn it. And as time went on, I began to dislike and to hate the Afrikaners, which made me even more reluctant to want to learn their language. Now, they were brutal at that school. We were 10-year-olds, and they were caning us. They weren't these rulers on the hand like we were getting in Australia. I remember one occasion when the teacher had sat us in a grandstand. There must have been 20 or 30 kids. He sat us in a grandstand, told us to be quiet. We were outside and he went to get something. And when he was away, he heard us laughing and giggling and carrying on. And he lined 30 of us up and he caned us over the back of the legs with a cane. So that's how militant they were in those days. They were really a militaristic society. I mean, some of the school cadets, if you look at them now, they look like Nazi youth. So that was hard to come to terms with, but we were thrust in there and there was no alternative. Now, I was going to finish this video with what happened sort of towards the end of Mum's life, because that's coming, but I think I've given you a bit of an idea of the events leading up to that December when we lost Mum. I've given you an idea of the months after we left the Brackpan Hotel, of Mum finding her feet and starting to work in a role she'd only dreamt of that the relief of the ulcer passing, Dad being thrown into the bakery, and I used to go down with him, and sometimes I'd help pack bread rolls, and I got talking to all the African bakers. Dad tended to be the only white baker on shift, and he'd have perhaps 20 or 30 Africans working underneath him. They'd be Swazis and Zulus and Xhosas and Sutus. Sometimes there'd be fighting between the bakers because of tribal rivalries. They were always bakers asleep on top of the stacks of flour, and Dad had to learn how to supervise, groups of workers. So I've given you an idea of the events leading up to those times. There is a letter somewhere I had, and I could find it again, but in the letter it's written to my grandparents, Nana and Grampy, and Dad is describing a Christmas kids party that's coming up for work. In the letter he says, in a fortnight's time, Roma and I are taking Nikki to a work Christmas party, and we think we're looking forward to that, and we think that Nikki will enjoy that. So that's I think a good time to end this video and leave you thinking about that Christmas party that was coming up in 1971 in December. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope I've kept you entertained. Some of the knockers from the other videos have said I'm not animated enough. I'll try and be more animated, but I'm just trying to get the facts out to you as I remember them. If you stuck with me so far, you're a 5-star subscriber. So stick with me a little further, and we'll get this story done. Until then, over and out.
We're not going to start the tape today. Well, we've just been down for a long walk to the Forest Strand Hospital in Springs. It's quite a long way, and I'm parked on having a cold banner. I haven't been too well this last week. I've had gastroenteritis, and I had it for about 4 days, and the doctor came in and gave me this medicine. I have got a ringworm on my head, and gave me some medicine for that. And one's okay, one's peppermint flavour, the other one's yellow, but it's horrible. Anyway, when we were walking down there, we had to go past the location. A few little toddlers were at the gate and said hello to us. And then at the kindergarten, a million stuck their head out and waved to us. And yesterday I was playing. I had Mum's rubber gloves on playing the fingerless monster. I've got all this written down because I've tried twice and got stuck for words. And we had beautiful roast pork, I think it was, and chicken, and it's quite cheap here. And I was pulling all the grass out for Dad with my hands, and the in Prince George's Avenue down bit. There was an accident where this car crashed and I was down there on my bike and all blood was coming from this bloke's head and yeah, I can talk a bit of Afrikaans. Can ik een glass of water kry alsjeblieft? That means can I have a glass of water please? And I can say waar your feet? That means where's your bicycle? And I can call Andrew a Babajan. That means baboon. And I can talk quite a bit really. That if I kept telling you every word, just take up the whole tape. And I don't know how long the tape is. It's Aiden's tape, and we've promised to buy him a new one. 2 Sundays ago, we went to Hobbersdale, and we were, and up there were all these goats and that. We were walking around and everything. We probably told you the letters, but we'll tell you again just to bore you. And there were all these pigs, goats and cattle and that, and there were all these women with big necklaces and copper change and that around their legs, and Jack's little baby was sick up there, and I go down to the hotel to see him sometimes, and at work they've got this bloke called, at Dad's work they've got this bloke called Two Boy, and because it takes 2 African boys to get him down, he smashes them all over the head, and I'm playing with him, and then they all gang up on him and get him, and I'm in this club called Secret 7, and with all these clubs and that, and I'm in there, all these badges and that, and I keep saying, and we have puppet shows and that, and again, well, at school, I don't like school at all because this bloke I don't like, he always screams and shouts at me and that, and hits me and that, and Aiden and me and this other boy are going to try and ride to Swaziland. We might be going up to this farm with the school.